Terrifying Astral Journeys. Hello, community. I wish to remain anonymous, but what I do want to do is recommend to anyone attempting to make contact with the afterlife to be very careful, as you could lose your soul and become completely disconnected, essentially in a vegetative state for the rest of your life. And worst of all, in the mildest of consequences, the spirits of those who haven't transcended could take over your body. In the most terrifying consequences, some demon or dark spirit could use your body for entirely diabolical purposes. While tidying up my room, I found that book that came as a gift when I bought the entire Game of Thrones series from a bookstore. It's a guide for astral travel. As I looked at the cover, I remembered why I never read it again and the horrible experience I had when I decided to practice everything it instructed. This happened about 2 years ago. I opened the package that had arrived with the books from the series, and at the very bottom was that guide. On the bookstore's website, I had seen that the book they gave as a gift was a surprise, so I waited to be surprised. At first, I didn't even pay much attention to it, so I focused on reading my fantasy saga, nearly forgetting about the surprise book I had received with my purchase. I'm not sure why that book came to mind while I was talking with my older brother, but I mentioned only the title. My brother said he had seen amazing experiences related to astral travel on social media, and that only a few managed to achieve what's known as astral projection, or the act of separating your soul from your body for various purposes. Hearing this, it sounded like an interesting explanation, but seemed like science fiction, inspired by The Matrix, perhaps. My brother explained to me that astral travel was nothing more than the separation of our astral body from our earthly body while remaining conscious. This means shifting your awareness into an intangible and unobservable form to others. It sounded incredible the first time I heard it, but it still didn't make me want to try reading the book, not even out of curiosity. I told this to my brother, who tried to convince me to give it a try since I'm relatively calm and good at relaxing. Not to mention the patience I have for everything, except for when he annoys me. He also explained that achieving an incredible state of relaxation is necessary to even have a chance at successful astral projection. Our mom interrupted us that time to help her with something in the garden, so we didn't touch on the subject further. But I couldn't get the idea out of my head, especially after he mentioned that I could be someone who could successfully perform the process. 3 days passed, and I still couldn't shake the idea from my head. When I finished reading the first book from the series I had bought, I decided to take a look at the book that had been on my mind. I had intended to only read the introduction, but it was so interesting that I found myself reading for hours. The guide was excellent, and as I read, I wanted to know more and more. It wasn't an extensive book, so I finished it easily in 2 days. I took notes on the important steps and what I needed to keep in mind to ensure everything went well. I was so curious that I nearly had them memorized. However, I didn't immediately put these steps into practice after finishing the book. I decided it would be better to research on the internet and hear testimonies from people who had already undergone an astral journey. I was surprised when I found numerous accounts from people who claimed to have tried it without ever succeeding. On several websites, I found instructions similar to what I had read in the book, although I must admit that the book's instructions were much better and more detailed. I decided to search for testimonials from people who had read the book I had just discovered, and that's when I came across very different responses. Those who had read the book said that their first astral journey had been amazing, and they had been doing it every week for years. Others claimed it was a unique and awe-inspiring experience that everyone should practice. I confess that it was these last comments that convinced me to change my mind, and that's when I decided to put into practice the steps I had already learned, hoping that I would eventually achieve a successful astral projection. I didn't want to tell my brother that I had changed my decision, so I kept it a secret and waited for nightfall when everyone else was asleep to do what the book instructed if I wanted to successfully perform astral projection. Everyone in my house had to be asleep, as one of the steps was to recite a mantra, a word spoken in syllables with a deep voice. Each syllable had to be recited until I ran out of breath and then continue with the next. I had to repeat this 5 times and then recite the mantra mentally until I felt an energy flowing through my entire body. The book said that this sensation was similar to an electric shock, but without pain and without being uncomfortable, rather a pleasurable experience. If that were to happen, all I had to do was get out of my bed and give a small jump. If I remained suspended in the air, I would have succeeded, but if not, I had to try again that same night or another. It's worth mentioning that the book also mentioned that I needed to be in a half-asleep state when reciting the mantra, which was somewhat tricky because many nights I would fall asleep without reciting it. It took me several days, but I finally managed to train my body not to fall asleep easily, and sometimes I would recite everything without falling asleep. There were even times when I would start reciting the mantra, but sleep would overcome me, and I would drift into the arms of Morpheus. After around 20 days of practicing this every night, I had become accustomed to it, to the point where I no longer cared whether I successfully achieved an astral projection or not. I simply awaited the sensation of an electric shock throughout my body before going to sleep without performing the jump that would indicate success or failure, until one day, I achieved it. I had been attempting it for almost a month when I received a much stronger jolt than any previous ones. It was so powerful that it jolted me awake, causing me to open my eyes suddenly. At that moment, I knew something had changed, something was different, and what's worse was that I no longer felt my bed beneath me. I rose from my bed, pretending it was still tangible, and when I gave the jump, I received the biggest shock of my life. My feet didn't touch the ground. I was suspended in the air, and when I turned, I could see myself lying in my bed. I could see my intangible, brilliant, and transparent body, and simultaneously, my physical body. Most importantly, there was a shimmering, translucent silver thread that occasionally glowed brightly, connecting both of my bodies. I tried to touch the wall with my hand, but I passed right through it. I remember feeling such fear upon seeing this that I woke up immediately. It was instant, as if it had all been a dream, but it was clear that it hadn't been. I had successfully achieved astral projection. I then recalled that the book had warned us to remain calm since any sudden shock or fear in the astral plane would cause our earthly bodies to react. In response to that stimulus, we would wake up and return to our bodies. The most important warning, however, was that when you saw that silvery thread, as it's commonly known, begin to shine, you should be very cautious. It was a sign that something wasn't right, and it was better to return before something or someone severed it and entered your body, as it was clear that you'd never be able to return from the afterlife. On the other hand, it was amazing, and I wanted to do it again, so I waited for the following night. And I succeeded once more. I continued to succeed in the following nights. I could do it at will, even during the day. I learned to do it while sitting, then with my eyes open, and finally without reciting the mantra with my mouth, only with my mind. So, if everything was going so well, you might be wondering why it turned out to be one of the worst experiences I ever had. The problem was that, while researching online, I found a girl who shared a different mantra from the one the book provided. This girl claimed that this new mantra would allow us to see an angel or even God if we practiced it constantly. I didn't want to dismiss her claims, as the mere act of separating my astral body from my physical body was already difficult to believe. That's why I hadn't told anyone about it. So, I noted down this new mantra in the Notes app on my phone. Another very important warning regarding astral journeys, which the book emphasized, was that if you spied on other people, you risked encountering a witch who might identify you and use you to help her in her dark work. You would become the famous protectors, the souls of the living with the hope of returning to their bodies. Don't take my word for it, but it's said that many people who end up in a vegetative state is because they try to return to their bodies, but someone or something has their silver thread and won't let them return. You practically become a spiritual slave with the promise of one day reuniting the cord of life or silver thread, but now you depend on a ruthless being who would think twice before letting you return to your body. Experiences like this are used to keep you from escaping or returning to your body, and people believe they have control over you. Ultimately, it's said that the moment of death is when they finally let go of your silver thread, and you can return to your body, although by that time, it's too late. To avoid these dangers, you are advised not to spy on people and to be cautious while exploring the astral plane. When you see your silver thread begin to shine, it's signaling that the path is dangerous, and it's better to return or avoid that place. But there's a well-known saying that truly happens: curiosity killed the cat, and that's exactly what happened to me. I remembered the new mantra I had noted down in my app and recited it that night. I concentrated deeply, as I wanted everything to go well. But no matter how hard I tried, I didn't feel the sensation that served as a signal for a successful astral projection. It was frustrating because I couldn't achieve anything, and many times, I would simply abandon the process without any sensation, without a successful astral journey. I thought that since it was more than just an astral journey, it might take time to succeed. Imagine, having contact with an angel or even God was undoubtedly a challenge, so I was patient and continued experimenting for several more days until something different happened. That early morning, I finally felt that electric shock throughout my body. But when I opened my eyes and tried to wake up, my body didn't respond. The only thing I could move were my eyes because I couldn't even control my mouth. It was strange. When I opened my eyes, I felt an incredible cold, as if I were lying on snow, and all I could see was the ceiling. At that moment, I began to hear footsteps all around my room. Not just from one person, but from several. The cold was the least of my problems because my body started trembling, but from fear. I couldn't see who was there with me, no matter how hard I tried to turn my head. What's worse was that I could hear them talking, but I couldn't understand a word. It seemed like they were speaking in a different language, but it was clearly audible. Their words were unintelligible to me, and their voices sounded somewhat distant, as if they weren't really there with me. But the sound of the footsteps confirmed they were. There they were. I was surprised that, although I was scared, I didn't wake up. So I assumed it wasn't an astral journey, it was something else entirely. At first, I thought it might be sleep paralysis, but if that were the case, reciting the first mantra would have pulled me out of it, successfully achieving the astral projection. But it didn't happen. I mentally attempted it for several minutes, but nothing happened. The voices stopped, and shortly after, the footsteps did too. So I began to calm down. However, the next thing I felt was someone sitting on my bed beside me and getting closer. I didn't expect to see anything or anyone, but I was very wrong. A boy placed his face above mine, and I observed his face. It was missing an eye, so I couldn't help but focus on that black hole, as though it were a void. His other eye was red, without a discernible pupil, and it appeared as if his iris was spinning. He was wearing a black robe with a hood that covered everything except his face. He extended his hand to touch me. As he drew nearer, I believed it was impossible to feel his touch, but I was wrong. His hand caressed my cheek, and I felt it distinctly. It was at this point that I began to cry. This person could harm me, and I couldn't do anything to defend myself, not even move. I felt like my strength was slowly returning, and I let out a loud scream when I could barely move. I closed my eyes for a moment, and when I opened them, that boy, or rather that sorcerer, was gone. The intense cold I had felt disappeared almost instantly, and I was covered in sweat. My parents and my older brother entered upon hearing me scream, and my crying wouldn't stop. I was extremely frightened. They asked me what had happened, but I could only reply that I had had a nightmare. My older brother hugged me and stayed with me when my parents left. He had been waiting for them to leave, as he had held me until they exited my room. When they did, he let me go and told me I had 2 finger marks on my cheek, made with what appeared to be black ink. I touched my face and felt the coldness of the liquid on my cheek, just as he had described. I rushed to the bathroom and washed it off immediately, not wanting to look at those fingers on my face. But my brother wouldn't forget that, so he demanded I tell him what had happened, and I did. He said that it had been a terrible idea to listen to what that girl on social media had said, especially when my astral journeys had been going so perfectly. That night, I couldn't escape his scolding, but he was right, so I decided never to recite that mantra again. I went a week without practicing astral journeys. I wanted to put that bad experience behind me. When I thought I had succeeded, I returned to following the book's instructions. That night, I tried to relax, as it was perfect for an astral journey that would make me forget about what had happened. I recited the mantra mentioned in the book and then continued it mentally, hoping to feel the electric shock sensation throughout my body, indicating that everything was in order and that I still had access to the astral plane. But something went wrong. I didn't realize that in my half-asleep state, I had stopped reciting the mantra from the book and had recited the one mentioned by that girl instead. It was just a moment. I did it at most 2 times, but those 2 times were enough to put me back in that horrible state. This time, however, I wasn't paralyzed, and not only could I move my eyes, but also my entire head and neck. I could turn and see my entire room, but the rest of my body didn't respond. It was then that I saw him, sitting on my bed. It was the same dark monk who had touched my cheek a week earlier. His voice sounded muffled, as if he were dry inside, and I could hardly understand what he was saying. But one thing was certain, he was summoning things. Even though my head could move, I couldn't speak. My mouth was sealed in some way I can't explain, but I couldn't open it. And suddenly, "Why didn't you want to come back?" the boy asked me, with the most serious look in the world. "Did I scare you?" he would say sarcastically. I wanted to move and run away, or at least scream, but I couldn't, and what scared me most was that if he came close he could hurt me. He had already proven that we were not on the astral plane, and that wherever we were, he could touch me and hurt me. His clothing was still the same as that time. It almost seemed like he was there waiting for me to come back somehow, but he still didn't understand how he could get the wrong mantra. My concentration rarely fails, and even less so on that. Something must have happened, a suggestion, perhaps, but somehow I had been manipulated to return to that place. That boy knew a lot about me. He told me that since my first trip he had been watching me, but he couldn't do anything to me while I wasn't on the astral trip, not even contact me or make himself visible, so he looked for a way for me to fall into that place again. It was then that the door to my room opened, and a girl entered with a tunic just like his, but her head was uncovered. She approached and smiled Machiavellianly when she saw me. Then she saw the boy and told him that I was the number 20 who had fallen into the trap of the mantra that was supposed to allow us to see an angel or God. I couldn't believe how stupid I had been to believe him. I had understood then that it was no accident that I was there. She had been very careless, at least me and 19 other people. He couldn't ask them what they wanted to do with me, my mouth wouldn't respond. Then she came closer to me and held my throat tightly. She didn't look more than 30 years old. She was very pretty. There was no blemish on her face. She told me that I was going to return to that place, even without the need to recite the mantra, and she proceeded to kiss me on the lips. She applied a lot of pressure, and it felt so cold. It was like kissing someone lifeless, or some very cold metal surface. Her lips weren't soft at all and didn't even look like they had flesh. When she moved away from me, I suddenly woke up. Again, she had black ink on me, and the place was very obvious, my lips. I went to the bathroom again and washed myself after wiping my tears and calming down. My legs shook with every step they took, and I was more afraid to fall asleep, so I didn't. I stayed up all night, and the next day I couldn't even eat. Everything I ate I vomited, or it gave me a severe stomach pain. My brother asked me what was wrong, but I didn't tell him anything that time. Whatever she was into, she didn't want him involved. He asked me how that girl was going to make me go back to that place without reciting a mantra, and it seemed pretty obvious. The only way they had was at bedtime. Spending the rest of my life awake was not an option, so I had to find a solution on my own without my family finding out. I reviewed the book that gave me instructions for astral travel, and I read a part that I didn't remember, one that said that in the astral world we had an unlimited source of information, and that we could access it whenever we wanted. I thought that if it were true, I could look into what was happening to me and somehow find an answer, but one thing was certain, I couldn't fall asleep, so I sat down and relaxed. I already knew how to enter the astral plane without falling asleep, so fortunately it wasn't a problem. I successfully performed the astral splitting, and that was when I confirmed that the problem was falling asleep like that out of nowhere. The book said that I should make a kind of prayer to the spiritual mother or the father, and that they would give me an answer to whatever I asked for. I did it, and in less time than I thought someone came through the door of my house. I was in the living room, with my astral body levitating over the dining room table. That person did not let me see his face, and he was wearing a tunic, but white. He asked me what he wanted, and I told him everything that had happened to me since I started reciting a different mantra. I thought he would scold me, but he was someone very relaxed, although from his voice it was somewhat difficult to deduce if he was a man or a woman. He told me that I was so careless that I had not realized that there was no longer one thread coming out of my body that connected my earthly body, but two. That's when I looked at him. One thread was silver and shiny, and connected to my body, but the other was dark and I couldn't see the other end. He crossed the house and went out to another place. That person told me it wasn't good for me to follow that thread and said they would help me cut it. They approached me and took out a translucent and shiny liquid from their tunic. They told me to take a little of it and hold it in my mouth, so I did. Then, they said that I should sleep peacefully at night, and if I found myself in that place again, I should spit the liquid in the face of the girl tormenting me. After saying that, I returned to my physical body and woke up. I was lying on the dining table in the living room. There was nothing in my mouth, but I was sure the liquid would be there once I fell asleep and woke up in that horrible place. The hours passed quickly, and I no longer felt fear. I knew I had someone's help, and I wouldn't be alone. What I later found out was that this person was what we call guardian angels, or family members who watch over us. When night came, I waited for everyone to fall asleep so that I could sleep as well. I didn't recite any mantras, I just closed my eyes and lay on my back. I was very calm, so falling asleep wasn't a problem. In less time than I had imagined, I opened my eyes and was back in that place. I thought it would be straightforward, but it was impossible for me not to feel fear when I saw over 30 people in my room, all dressed in black robes, looking at me with sinister intent. My whole body could move, but it wouldn't do me any good. That's when I realized I had the liquid inside my mouth, something that was already there as soon as I opened my eyes. I was sure it was what my guardian angel had given me. The catch was that I didn't see the girl, and I couldn't get off my bed. Something told me that those people would harm me, there was no doubt about it. I tried to conceal the liquid in my mouth, keeping my cheeks from puffing up. Suddenly, the door to my room opened, and the girl walked in. Everyone made way for her to reach me. I don't know how, but I managed to stand on my bed, my back against the wall. I was afraid, which was evident, but the only thing that could help me was to spit that liquid at her. I noticed that as the girl was about to climb onto my bed, she stopped and stared directly into my face. She was approaching with a smile, but it vanished when she stood beside my bed. "It seems you won't be coming with us," she said disdainfully. She climbed onto the bed and quickly lunged at me, covering my mouth with her hand. She was incredibly strong. Not even with both my hands could I free myself. She leaned in close and whispered in my ear, "It doesn't matter, I have others who weren't as clever as you. Go ahead, make me disappear and let's get this over with." The people in my room began to climb onto the bed and move closer to me. I knew they were going to harm me, and that's when the girl removed her hand from my mouth. I immediately spat the liquid at her face. Almost a second after doing so, I woke up. I was lying with my back against the wall, sweating, and in the center of the mattress, there was a large spot of black ash. I called my parents, crying, and my brother. We got rid of the mattress, and my mom called the priest from our church to perform a cleansing in our house, even though I knew it wouldn't help. I never found out who that girl was. I can't imagine how many people fall for it and don't have the same luck as me. I wanted to post this on social media, but I'm currently interning at a company, and I didn't want my employers to see this. I don't want them to think I'm crazy and lose my job or my degree. So, I decided to keep it to myself and share my terrifying experience with astral travel with you. At night, I pray for those people who are deceived, that they can also get rid of that girl, or that all those who are held captive by witches or warlocks can return to their bodies. If this was terrifying for me, I can't even begin to imagine all the things people do when they serve evil against their will just to return to their bodies. Since then, I never attempted astral travel again. No matter how safe they may seem, I decided it was best to leave them behind. Thank you for listening. Story written for Dark Secret by Johnny.